The other thing that our council remembers is perception.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can confirm that the live stream and recording has begun. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Eckert, seconded by Councillor Niznik. Be it resolved that Council reconvene the regular meeting. To Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Just a motion to reconvene the meeting and for a vote.
All those in favor? None opposed? Motion carries.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That does bring us to Section 13, Presentation and Consideration of Reports. Our first report this morning is 13.2.1, Regulation of Cannabis Odor in the Town of Pelham. I have a motion put forth by Councillor Niznik, seconded by Councillor Kerr. Be it resolved that Council receive Report 2024-0241, Regulation of Cannabis Odor in the Town of Pelham for information, and that Council determine its preferred approach to odor regulation in the Town of Pelham, and that Council approve in principle the proposed odor management bylaw that corresponds to its preferred approach, being option blank, and that Council provide direction to staff on the administrative penalty amounts proposed for contraventions of the proposed bylaw, and that Council direct that the selected version of the odor management bylaw be presented to Council for consideration at their next meeting of Council. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you, Madam Clerk. I will open this to Council. Any thoughts and comments on this report? If I may, so I will ask a few questions of bylaw, if I may, first of all. And I haven't broached this with the CAO. One of the comments that that our odor person mentioned and thought that we would, going ahead, was to hire a full-time odor person. So during the day, obviously bylaw up until now has been doing that, and that I'm looking at the big picture here. In the wintertime, we have people on call that when we get a snowstorm in the middle of the night, we phone them up and we have them go out and plow snow. We have sufficient people on the bylaw, and I don't know how you'd work it out. I'm not human resources, but from your as head of bylaw, do you think that that would be possible? That if we continue to use the nasal ranger, and we had someone phone in at 3 o'clock in the morning to bylaw, is it feasible that we could send someone out at that time to do the measurement, to interview that person, and that would eliminate the need, if indeed there is a need, to hire a full-time odor expert? Because that seems to be the thing, the main complaint, is that the people are saying that this is happening off hours, whether it be a Sunday, whether it be 3 o'clock in the morning, and of course that could be very likely. So going forward, in that particular part of the report, is, I guess, you or Mr. CAO, is that something that this council could have at our disposal, is to have someone on call at bylaw, that if we got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, listen, my windows, the smell's coming in, I need someone here in half an hour. Is that possible? I mean, as opposed to spending $80,000 to get to the same point, we would just have someone on call who is qualified. We've discussed this before, that anyone with a nasal ranger that goes out, they meet the qualifications, they have been trained on it. Is that possible? And I don't know, should I, well, I see Mr. CAO will inform us.
In fairness, as a basic starting point, kind of all things are doable when they're adequately resourced. The town of Pelham employs 2 full-time bylaw officers, and for 4 months of the year, there's a part-time bylaw officer. So 8 months a year, it's 2. 4 months a year, it's 2.5. This term of council, we have, by law, has taken on, we have strengthened the animal bylaw and specifically dealing with waste and some enforcement actions in cemeteries, late night and early morning. And we've taken on parking at the MCC and randomized attendance either late at night or early in the morning. We try not to be too specific for obvious enforcement reasons. The town is not the NRP. Our staffing is 2 or 2.5, depending on the time of year. So we could not come out 7 nights a week. You can't send staff who work 8 to 4, 9 to 5, whatever that happens to be, every 7 days a week at midnight. But if you're asking, is it technically possible? The answer is yes. Good news is you're going to pass a budget in a month. We haven't budgeted, and not being funny or facetious, but if you want extra enforcement, that is possible, not in the budget we put in front of you. You'll need to make some resources available. But in theory, can that be done? Yes. Certainly some weekends, some after hours, some at night is possible. It is a question of resources, and you control both resources and direct levels of service. So the good news, and you make that decision in a fundamental way once a year. Good news, you make that decision next month.
Okay, thank you for that then going forward. Thanks. Again, I'll go to council, or also I can continue my comments. I'll go to Council Eckert first.
Okay, so is this the part where I got to try to repeat?
Yes.
This is where you get emotional.
Okay. Passionate.
Passion.
Where I want to start is by saying that we should be prepared for the cannabis companies, I will say, rather than just one in particular, that anytime we're going to lay a charge, which is probably going to be the first one laid in Canada or certainly in Ontario, I would say, we're going to get challenged on that. And I think it's a challenge that we should be prepared to meet. They have a lot at stake in this, and they have a lot of money. And the cannabis industry is going to be behind the first one that gets charged because they're going to want to defeat the bylaw. But I think it's a fight worth taking, and we have very capable counsel to present that argument. I don't see that it's going to be as costly as some might think, because we are going to prosecute this in-house. Second, we're dealing with a company that has demonstrated, I would say, a very good corporate neighbor. They have not cooperated as far as I can see, in my opinion. So where do we move forward? I have never been an advocate of the nasal ranger. And if we were to continue using a nasal ranger, then I believe that the threshold needs to come way down. Leaving it where it is or close to where it is has done nothing in the past, and I believe it'll do nothing in the future. I am a very big supporter of the second option, where it is on the bylaw officer to respond. And the way that it's written out is, and it was explained to us, is it's not necessarily that the bylaw officer is the judge and jury and executioner of this, but the bylaw officer responds to a complaint. And the first part of that complaint is to go to the fence line, and if he can smell it, you can smell it. Anybody can say, I can smell it. Then you go to the complainant's residence, and if you can smell it there, in my opinion, that's met the threshold, which is defined in the definitions that our solicitor clearly outlined. So there's the guidelines for the bylaw officers. Then you go a little bit further than that, and especially at the beginning, because this is going to be big news. And that investigation has to be done properly. I've done a few in my life. Some of them, although I'm not going to say more important than this one, but some of them dealt with things that are far more serious in nature. And it's all about the investigation. And you have to be able to present the evidence in court for a reasonable judge, JP, whatever it is, adjudicator, to say, yes, this was objectionable, it was bad, and they're going to levy a fine or a conviction. It's imperative that that happens. You can't just say, I went to the fence, I went to the house. You can't go back 3 weeks later and say to a neighbor, hey, do you remember 3 weeks ago on Sunday, did you smell marijuana? Well, you smell it so many damn times that you're not going to remember what Sunday it was, because you're smelling it all the time. So it has to occur then. It has to be presented. Working with the town solicitor, she's going to work with the investigators to say, I need this, this, and this. Go out and get me this. That's what's going to happen. And then we'll start to hopefully get some convictions. Because the way it stands right now, and I've heard others make the comment, and they're absolutely correct. I mean, this whole thing started down the road because in 2015, there was a promise made that we were going to legalize marijuana in this country. And I'm not debating that, whether that's a good idea or it's not a good idea. But the problem is they were completely unprepared for what was going to come. And there was zero consultation with law enforcement. There was zero consultation with the producers, with anything. And when they started, they didn't even have a supply chain. They didn't have a supply of legal marijuana to go out to people who could buy it. So if we all remember, in 2016, the illegal sellers of marijuana were still having a booming business because the government didn't have any to sell to people. So we can only do what we can do as a municipality. We have certain powers. Now, I believe that we need to take those right to the nth degree and do everything in our power possible to try and alleviate this issue. Anything short of that, I believe we've failed. So my recommendation would be that I would support eliminating the numbers, which I think is option 1, if I read 2, and go for the, which is very similar to the way we prosecute noise bylaws, et cetera, where it is somewhat subjectionable, but with the definitions that are provided, it makes it a lot easier. So that's my position, and sorry for taking up so much time, but.
Not at all, Councillor. Thank you for your comments. I'll go to this side. Councillor Kerr.
Yes, I just have 2 questions, and it's more for the solicitor, and I want to refer to page 3, and it's how about your hand? Come here. Page 3. It says objectionable odor means odor emitted by an odorous facility that is detectable at the property line, disperses, etc. So then you go down the next one to say odorous facility means any land, building, or structure used to carry on a commercial or industrial operation other than agricultural operation. Now, my understanding is a greenhouse and growing of cannabis is considered an agricultural operation. So is this semi-redundant in the writing?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Kerr. So here's what I've found.
That was my watch.
As a municipality, we are precluded from legislating anything that has to do with a normal farm practice.
Right.
So as indicated in the staff report, the Farming and Food Production Protection Act 1998 says that if an operation is using a normal farm practice as an agricultural operation, which is defined to be for profit effectively, then the municipal bylaws do not apply to it. So in order to make this bylaw defensible and within our jurisdiction as the municipality to legislate or regulate with respect to odor, which we can do, it has to exclude agricultural operations because we do not have authority to regulate odor that comes from agricultural operations. And one of the things that we've talked about in this cannabis matter over the years is the fact that we as a municipality have some ability to regulate, but it is very limited. Health Canada is the branch of the federal government that is supposed to be regulating, and as you are aware, the regulations for cannabis producers say you have to equip your buildings with an air filtration system. But Health Canada has also recognized in public guidance that even putting in that filtration system is not going to eliminate odors. So the federal government is really the primary enforcement arm, but they're not doing it. Then you take it to the provincial level. They've given us authority as a municipality to regulate with respect to odor, but hands off anything that's a normal farm practice. So what does that leave us? That leaves us the ability to regulate odor that comes from a facility that is not engaged in agricultural operations, and yet the province has recognized cannabis production as agricultural in nature. So we are doing the very best we can with the limited tools we have at law to try and address this issue. Does that answer the question?
Sort of. I guess it just highlights to me, if I'm trying to fight this, I'm just going to walk into court and say, I'm an agricultural operation, I'm exempt. I mean, in very simplistic terms. So that was one thing. I've got one other query, and it was on page 5. Page 5, 6.1C, about the operations and maintaining a complaint log that details the time of the complaint, the location of the complainant, if known, wind direction, and any abnormal operating conditions existing at the time of the complaint. One is, this somewhat makes an assumption that the cannabis operation knows exactly at the time of the complaint. It somewhat infers to me that a person's making a complaint in a cannabis operation, in theory, would know of it instantly. The second part of this it was the terms abnormal operating conditions. Defining abnormal can be another huge situation. Abnormal is I was told that the weather conditions that we experience, research scientists told me years ago, this is our normally abnormal year for a season. So it was a classic of what is truly, and who defines what is abnormal. So those are the two kind of words that I pulled out as having concern to me. I concur with Councillor Eckert on his position and concepts of getting to a point, but these are two nervous points that I have in the defense of it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've listened to everything and our advice and our advisors and everything, and I've talked to the cannabis companies, and I know that these are problems that have been solved in the past, and they've been solved in other industries. And I've often wondered myself why we have a threshold. I mean, you know, this is the kind of thing where the number should be 0. So my number is basically 0. I don't believe in the nasal ranger except as an evidentiary support. But my number is 0, so I'm going to be in support of option 2, which is the reasonableness standard.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you. Councilor Wink?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're in a no-win situation here. Unfortunately, what we've got in our bylaws currently it's not effective whatsoever. Like, we haven't had nasal ranger readings under 7. Now we're seeing that case law is saying, well, if you go below 7, we're going to be running into difficulties to enforce it. We've used our expert, and our expert is also saying, get rid of the numbers on there. Unfortunately, the municipality has got limited things that they can do. So the best thing we can do is find them. They've got deep pockets. I agree with Councilor Eckert saying that, you know what, we'll end up in court, but so what? We'll end up in court and really, hopefully the courts will enforce something, but I feel for you. Like Wayne, you were saying the other day that you were barbecuing and you can't barbecue. You know, that's not acceptable. So if you put in a complaint, you know, we follow up on that complaint, and then we, through our AMP system, that we find the producer. Hopefully that will move the ball along. It will end up in court, you know, because quite frankly, well, two things. Either they say 250 progressive up to $1,000 or whatever for each infraction. They got deep pockets. So either we find the heck out of them and they just ignore it, or they're going to say, screw this, we're taking you to court. But that's the only tools that we've got. I feel for you. I really do. Like, what we've got in place now is not sufficient. Things have to change. So we've got to be that change agent and force their hand. And if it works, it works. If we go to court, hopefully we win. But what we've got right now is not working. So I will be fully in support of option 2. Is that the right one? That's no threshold. No threshold. Get rid of thresholds. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. To Counselor Nesnick, perhaps? Oh, no? Oh, okay, excellent. To Counselor Hildebrand.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I just agree with my fellow councilors in what they're saying. I just want to go over the definition of a substantiated complaint, because the wording we've got here is the source of the order, it's on page 3 of 8, and is it satisfied that the order constitute objectionable order? And I think, listening to my fellow councilors, that we're just talking about an odor. We're not asking the bylaw officer to say it's objectionable. We're just saying that there is an odor, and that the odor causes the residents a problem rather than adverse effect. And that to me is a substantiated complaint. And I think that needs to be clarified for me to proceed, because what's objectionable to someone else is not objectionable to me. And what's an adverse effect is the same thing. So to me, that wording has to be changed. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Counselor. I'll go to our legal representative.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. So I think when we look at the definition of substantiated complaint, it references the definition of objectionable odor, and that is defined as being the reasonable person standard. So whether the officer, him or herself, finds it to be objectionable is really not the test, right? It's whether the assessment is, would this be bothersome to a reasonable person? And I think that's a defensible standard. On the adverse effect piece, adverse effect is a holdover from the old bylaw, and is incorporated at the suggestion of the expert. Were it up to me entirely, I would remove that and have a single standard for contravention of the bylaw, a single standard being objectionable odor. And council can provide direction with respect to penalties that are appropriate for that. But in my view, adverse effect is far more subjective. It also comes out of the Environmental Protection Act, which is not a statute that we can enforce. It doesn't belong to us. So that would, I think, address your concern about the substantiated complaint definition, if I'm right about what the concern is, and also streamline the bylaw a bit from an enforcement standpoint as well. So that would be my recommendation to council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I agree. I think we need to streamline it. I think we have to make it simple so it doesn't become a big interpretative item for the bylaw officer. It either is a smell and forget about all the other ramifications of it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nesnick? Or, oh, CAO Cribs. If not, I will talk. If Councillor Nesnick does.
I just want to kind of remind all of us, we'd be very happy if there was a motion to amend the direction from council for us to amend that draft, if that's your choice, and to remove adverse effect and to focus on objectionable. But I also, I'm not going to make any friends with my next words, but understand that we have we're regulating into nuisance, and a bylaw officers have to have, whether you like it or not, they have some discretion. It cannot be that simply placing a phone call means a charge is going to be laid automatically. You cannot reduce the standard down to that. We have a federal government that's supposed to be regulating and says it's impossible to grow cannabis without odor escape. Now, that blows my mind. But thank you, federal government, for setting us up with that duality of, I don't even want to finish the sentence. So that there's some reasonable public expectation, but also council's expectation. You can come up with a fairly rigorous expectation, but it is not an absolute. If there's any hint of cannabis in the air, that's going to trigger a charge. That cannot be the outcome of whatever bylaw this corporation passes for this community. That's too low a threshold, and we don't have that power to go there. So objectionable does have to have some meaning, more than mere trace elements and more than nothing. The adverse effect language we'd like to get away from, the Supreme Court said it has to be more than trivial, and it's the wrong concept because it's a statute we're not supposed to enforce, and it's meant to deal with other issues, not cannabis in the air and a municipal bylaw. But at least the best interpretation of that is more than trivial. And so I just want to make sure we're all on the same page that a phone call or a complaint doesn't automatically lead to a charge, even if there's some amount of cannabis in the air. Objectionable has to mean something more than, I don't know that I can define it either. But certainly trivial isn't going to get it done. And I just don't want us to get too excited down that road like that. We have to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. You did have the floor, Councillor. You okay? Okay, thank you. Councillor Nesnick?
Yes, thank you. So earlier I had some questions with regards to maintaining the nasal ranger but lowering the threshold. I think after conversation, it does appear that would not be defendable in court or defensible in court. My concern was that it would help support the bylaw officer in making a determination that, yes, a charge does need, or a fine does need to be levied. However, after further conversation and the way the bylaw is written, I'm confident that they can make that decision going forward. So my only question maybe to Ms. Sturton is, right now it says that this is only enforceable to businesses that produce cannabis. So in relation to the noise bylaw, which, neighbors can individuals can also be charged with a noise bylaw. Would we ever be going down that same road with regards to cannabis odors? So, if my neighbor's growing it and it stinks and it interferes with my life, would I be able to make a complaint or lodge a complaint under this bylaw?
Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Niznik, not under this bylaw. As Council is aware, our nuisance bylaw is on the list for a refresh, and at that time, I will undertake the research necessary to determine if an individual who is licensed to grow or who is growing in accordance with the federal permissions, I think it's up to 4 plants per person, if that can be encompassed in the nuisance bylaw, I will look at that at that time, but certainly the short answer to your question is not under this bylaw.
Okay, thank you. And I think with regards to the comments made about the adverse effect, there are eight measures there that kind of outline what an adverse effect is. So I'm quite confident or comfortable with leaving that in there because it does state like loss of enjoyment and normal use of property or harm or material discomfort to any person. So those are easily, I think, described and would be supported by our bylaw if needed. So I'm fine with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. A question I have for the legal. Obviously, we're changing this bylaw or the previous bylaw. If we pass something today and 6 months down the road, we decide either through legal action or whatever, that we want to come back and address this again, what are the implications, and how are our hands tied coming back again? I hope it doesn't happen, but in case we wanted to come back and make a change, what are the implications?
Through you, Mayor, all we're looking for today is some direction on sort of an approval in principle as to the approach we're going to take. This bylaw can certainly be refined and will ultimately be presented to Council in a couple of weeks for final approval. And if we get out there and in implementing the bylaw we find in 6 months, 9 months, a year that it's not working, we can amend the bylaw. There's nothing preventing us from doing that. And even if it were to be challenged, I think we could make amendments during the ordinary course of business, even if there was a pending court challenge.
Okay, thank you. So here are my thoughts, for whatever it's worth. Anybody got 2 cents? So back when we had that meeting in July, I don't know how many times I promised citizens that we as a council were going to come back here and revisit the bylaw. And I assured everyone that we would be using, that if we stayed with the nasal ranger, we would take that down to 2, at the most 3. When we started using the nasal ranger, we had Phil Gerard, who was in the odor bylaw or odor expert. He wanted us, he was okay with us using the odor ranger or the nasal ranger. We possibly didn't go with his number, but at the time, he advised us that that was indeed a good tool to use. If you read this report that's before us now, he is in fact telling us to do away with numbers and go as our council members have indicated. I'm a farmer and a counselor. I'm not an odor expert. So it sort of threw me for a loop when we had an odor expert tell us a couple of years ago that this is the way to go, and now we're halfway down the river and he's changed his thinking. Maybe he's studied case law and he's seen enough examples that, okay, we have to go the other way. What scares me by going the other way is that we've had this kind of conversation between non-legal people, and God knows what it's going to be like when we get in a courtroom and 2 high-paid lawyers discussing each and every word in our bylaw and saying, well, this is how I interpret, and your interpretation, Counselor, is way off the mark. That's what I'm afraid of. And we pay for arguments, and that's what we get. Whereas if you have a number, if you have a solid number whether it be 2 or 3. There it is, as a help perhaps. The option that has, we stay with the nasal ranger, and we also go to the other opportunity. Maybe that's, I just, when I see this, I just can't, I'm not going to vote for, and then again, if I don't vote, I'm telling this Phil Gerard, well, you don't know what you're talking about, and I'm going to vote against you. So that doesn't make sense to me either. So I don't know, I guess we'll just call the question, and I'll see. I still believe I know what it takes. I've gone down to bylaw. I see what it takes to operate that nasal ranger. Councilor Olson said he took the test and he wasn't qualified to run it. So we know that they're trained. We know that there's a process, just that it's too high. But then if we go down to 2 or 3, we have the lowest number in North America. And is that going to be defensible in court? It's just, I don't know, the whole thing stinks. So,
That's worth a nickel.
yes, is that a nickel? There we go. I don't know. Like I say, I'm always, whenever we have a tough decision to make, especially if staff brings it to us, I always encourage this council, go with staff. They know what they're talking about. That's their livelihood. So when I have a fellow like Phil Gerard, I've met him a couple of times, and he's saying, go away, don't use the numbers, and then all of a sudden, I guess, I don't know, I guess I got to go that way, tell you honest truth. It doesn't make any sense to me, but if this indeed, we get the complaints, the thing is, we got to get this thing, complaints, and get into court and see where we stand. I mean, supposedly, we've been told that Lincoln has this system that we're talking about, but they've never they haven't taken it to court yet. So we don't know if indeed this is the answer. They haven't taken it. So it's a toss-up either way we go. Councilor Eckert.
Just to kind of dovetail on what you just said there, and I said this at the meeting earlier in the year, I just want to emphasize we've had great turnouts at council meetings and at special meetings of citizens who want this council to do something. And I'm going to turn right around and charge right back to the people in this audience and the ones that are listening that we can't do it alone, and the bylaw officers can't do it alone, and you have to be willing to step up. And part of that may be that you give a statement to a bylaw officer and you appear in court and you tell them about the adverse effects on that day and why you made the complaint. And with cooperation like that, I mean, there's an old saying going back to Sir Robert Peel that the police are the community and the community is the police, and they can't function independently. They have to function together. So I would encourage everybody listening and everybody here to cooperate fully and step up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Eckert. Any more comments? Councilor Kerr?
Yes, I appreciate Councilor Niznik bringing up the comments about describing adverse effect, which adds more teeth to the point. We discussed removing adverse as a word, but maybe adverse effect. The word effect maybe needs to be added to it rather than leaving it as the term adverse, because that's a loose. But I guess where I'm coming back to it in thinking about it, lowering it to a number, the dilution threshold for the machines are just talking about it. So it was to detect odor. The comment was it's strictly odor rather than the type of odor. And what's offensive to a single person may not be the same. So a threshold of 2 may be fine for 80% of the population, and a threshold of 2 may be offensive to 20% of the population. And they may find it that they can't enjoy their lifestyle based on what we're describing. So I'm going for the 0. I understand the concept of having a number to create something that you work against, but personally, I'm going to the 0 level because there's super smellers in every world, and I don't mean in a bad way. We found this in my other agricultural career. There are people that can detect things that nobody else can find nasally. So it's a real challenge, but what's offensive to one may not be offensive to another, and we start to throw numbers around without hard documentation and everything else. Now it becomes an arbitrary number that instantly gets challenged. And then I think if we go to it's either there or it's not there approach at the human level, and harm or material discomfort to any person, adverse effect on the health of any person, these are kind of things that we can take a person into court, because they're going to be the ones that are going to go along and under oath explain their position to a judge, and that's how many things are done legally. So I think it's following up the others. We got to get something down. We got to get it out there, and with all expectation that it'll likely be challenged. But at that point, at least we're going to have somebody in the legal system give us better direction than our speculating yes, no, maybe in between.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comments before we, I need someone to put Councillor Olson.
I'll put the motion that we choose option 2 and put that in the slot.
Okay, thank you. And again, perhaps the clerk can summarize option 2.
Yes, so option 2 is a bylaw with no odor threshold.
Okay. Thank you. Any other, so on the motion, I need a seconder. Is there a seconder for the motion? Councillor Eckert, you'll second the motion? Thank you. Councillor Olson, any further comments? You're the mover.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've said what I believe is all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eckert. No, any further discussion on the motion presented to council? Councillor Kerr.
And just to confirm, this is no odor threshold utilizing a mechanical device or olfactometer, correct? Because that's a human being detecting it, in theory, is detecting odor, so it's above threshold. You see where I'm going? I want to make sure that our confirmation is that we're not attaching equipment or measurement devices to this, correct?
Is that how, Madam Clerk, is that how you interpret that?
I would actually just defer to the town solicitor that that's her
sorry.
interpretation.
Yes.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Kerr. So the second option has no threshold, meaning a numerical threshold that's measured in odor units or dilutions to threshold. Now, if that is the option that's going forward, there are a number of items listed on page 9 of the staff report where we would be looking for direction. So if we go with the no odor threshold with a number, that takes care of some of them, but I would still be looking for some direction on the penalty amounts, the escalating penalty amounts, the approach to that, and whether or not to include adverse effects. So I'm not sure what the best procedural way to deal with that might be, but I would just ask the clerk to keep that in mind.
Yes, thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor to amend the motion to insert option 2 into the third recital. So we can deal with that before moving on. Mr. Mayor?
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on that part of the bylaw? Okay, so I'll call the motion. All those for option 2 as read by the clerk. All those in favor? Okay, 6-4. And all those against, I'm going to go against it just for whatever. Thank you. So motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as the town solicitor indicated, she is looking for direction on the administrative penalty amounts proposed for the contraventions of the proposed bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Any council want to put numerical values ahead or our discussion? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Wink.
So it's been put forward 2 different options. One is fairly simple. When we get into the second option that says minor, moderate, major, now we're getting into subjective things again, and we may say, well, that's minor, or we may say it's moderate, and the producers are going to say, well, no, that's minor. So just keep it simple. Just do a contravention. So the first graph that you've got in there, I think is fine.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment on Deputy Mayor's comments? Go ahead, Councilor Nesna.
Yes, thank you. Just wondering about the dollar amounts in that first chart. In the second chart, if it was a major contravention, the fine was $1,500 for each day. up on the first chart, it's $1,000 as after the third ticket is issued. So just wondering if those dollar amounts seem reasonable, $250, $500, and then $1,000. And then I assume after that it would be $1,000 every time there was a contravention. But can you just give me a little relativity in terms of those numbers that you chose?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Niznik. So those contravention amounts in the first chart are effectively based on noise and nuisance amounts imposed throughout Niagara, which is fairly analogous to what we're trying to do here. Now, we have had some discussion about deep pockets and so on. While the amounts cannot be punitive, that is the law, they could be moved up from what's in this first chart. So these were simply numbers presented for Council's consideration based on sort of a survey of comparable fines elsewhere, but the amounts can be adjusted, absolutely.
All right, so yeah, so I would suggest if anybody else would be willing to support increasing those amounts and go 500, 1,000, 1,500. I don't know if that's reasonable, or I don't know. I think you got to start hitting them where the pocketbook hurts, and then if they're going to rebel, they're going to rebel. But to go in for $250, it's worth them just to pay a ticket, to be honest with you. And I don't think they're going to worry about that. But if right off the bat they're $500, so you've got it on each day on which contravention occurs or continues. But so if it continues, how do you determine whether it continues? So wouldn't it be just the first offense would be, let's say $500, and then a second ticket would automatically go to the next fee increase? Or is there like a day limit thing that, just help me out there, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Niznik, all of that can be flexible. So I think the reason that we've framed it as for each day on which the contravention occurs or continues is to allow the bylaw officers to issue penalty notices, perhaps while still working toward voluntary compliance, or just to give some wiggle room, to use the standard term. But if council so wishes, we can certainly make it every complaint that the officer determines is a contravention. First complaint, $250 or $500. Second complaint automatically attracts the higher fine, and then third and subsequent would attract the higher level. I would suggest that we say within, say, a calendar year, because there has to be some sort of reset. $1,000 a day for 365 days would be difficult to defend in court.
Yeah, well, I think the reset certainly seems reasonable, but yeah, I think if you're getting one, you get the first price. If you get two, you get the second price. And if you go to the third time, you get the third price. And then the fourth one is that same third price and repeated. Those are my thoughts. I'm not sure about support for that.
Before we go to other members, let remember that we're talking about a business that makes $45 a square foot profit. We're not talking about growing tomatoes or onions, whatever. If I don't know why $250 and even $500, I don't know why it was totally outrageous. We put a couple of zeros on that. Like instead of $250, we take it right to $5,000.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I can advise that in Waynfleet there is a medical marijuana licensing bylaw. So it's not an odor bylaw, but it does pertain to persons growing cannabis with or without municipal approval. And the starting fine under administrative penalties is $2,000.
Thank you. I just mentioned that to council as we continue the debate. Councilor Ackert, you had words.
Yes, I would be in support of a higher fine, and I would be more along the lines of, if we're going to charge John Smith $250 fine for having a noisy party, and we're going to charge this company $250 that are producing 8,000 marijuana cigarettes a shift, $250 doesn't make sense to me, and I'm more along the lines of the mayor. Short, sharp sentences sometimes work very well, and I would say that we go to the max, whatever we can do, and without being punitive, yes, of course, So kind of stop the slap halfway, I guess, would be on them, yeah. But I would be more supportive of the mayor's amount.
Any other comments from other councilors on that? Kevin, Councilor Kerr?
Yeah, I support your rationale is exactly coming back to the financial generation per square foot in an operation. And I don't think, if you're following your numbers through, 1,000 square feet, which is not big,
No.
it's $45,000. I mean, I'll take a $250 hit on $4,000, pretty simple. That's an easy way, other than you set precedent on it. I concur that I think it can be higher. I'm supportive. I guess what I'm looking at is add a zero to the prescribed $250, $500, and $1,000, make that $2,500, $5,000, and $10,000 as an escalation. Just because whatever we put there is going to get their attention, and it's going to go to court. So I think we're all in agreement with that. Hearing 2,000 at Wainfleet, 2,500 is not dramatically different for a resale item versus a medically operating. The other entities are a little different. I'm sure the CAO is going, oh, well, we're setting ourselves up for getting slapped. But at some point, we've got to get reality into the game of the economics of what happens. And that's just my position.
If I can offer a commentary, look, we don't have guiding case law on yet in the province of Ontario on what's a punitive AMP. So Toronto doesn't have it, Mississauga doesn't have it, and now there's Little Pelham. I think you're entirely justified. Understand that you get to define what the public good is. You've been elected by people in this room and elsewhere to lead the community and to try to help grow and guide and protect the community. So you are well within your right to say that this is dealing with a serious community issue, and you think it's a reasonable quantum. I didn't get anxious when I heard 2,500, and I didn't get anxious when I heard 5,000. I did get anxious when you said 10. So if that's, it'll be Mr. Sturton who has to defend us in Superior Court of Justice, not myself. But I think her case would be dramatically better if the third number wasn't as high as 10. I think, because keeping in mind, we're here to serve everyone, including the cannabis companies. Right, this bylaw is meant to address any number of odorous industries, and we have some basic duties and procedural fairness owed to everyone. So if there was a different number for the third, I think you might find that far more defensible, but I think you're definitely barking up the right tree, or a reasonable tree within a range of reasonableness on the first two.
Thank you for that, Mr. CAO.
Yeah, so that being said, I'll go to 2,500, 5,000, and 7,500. I'll saw off in the middle.
So,
But it working under the assumption that you get a conviction on the first one, you have to have that completed in order to get to your second one. Just because they're charged doesn't mean that they have to pay instantly.
May I just clarify on that, if I could, please? What we're talking about in the report here, these are administrative penalties under our administrative penalty system. That is completely different than a court system where it would be charges. So what happens here is when the bylaw officer has grounds to believe that there's been a contravention of the bylaw, he or she can issue a penalty notice. The first contravention would be whatever amount we talk about. And then, as the CEO has previously indicated, at that point, there's a prescribed process in our administrative penalty bylaw for them to challenge that, but they then bear the onus of establishing that they didn't contravene the bylaw. So the onus is on them to make that establishment. If it's upheld at the screening stage, it goes to a hearing officer. Again, it's still the onus of the ticket recipient to establish that they did not contravene the bylaw. So that is different than if we go to court and we charge them under this would be a municipal act charge under the Provincial Offences Act for breaching or violating a municipal bylaw, there the maximum fines are prescribed by the Provincial Offences Act, and for a corporation it's $50,000 for the first conviction. But there we bear the onus of establishing the contravention beyond a reasonable doubt, not on a balance of probabilities. So it's a criminal standard at that point, and then they do have a right of appeal to a higher court from a conviction and so on and so forth. So, but what we are talking about here is the administrative penalty system, which is procedurally far simpler. It's all effectively done by in-house, and it's faster. So because of that, because it is a situation where they bear the onus of disproving the contravention, we have to limit how high the fines can, or they're not even fines, they're administrative penalties, how high the penalties are. And I would support the $2,500, $5,000, $7,500, because in addition to not being punitive, it also must be an amount that will promote compliance with the bylaw. And I very much take council's point that if you've got a for-profit industry that's making a significant amount of money, encouraging compliance with the bylaw might cost a little more for them than it would for the fellow having a noisy party on a Friday night.
Yep. Does the rest of council concur with that, with those figures? Okay, excellent. So perhaps staff can go by those figures, please. Thank you. To the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that amendment did pass, so that brings us to the main motion as amended. Would you like me to read it into the record?
Yes, please.
Okay, be it resolved that council receive report 2024-0241, regulation of cannabis odor in the town of Pelham for information, and that council determine its preferred approach to odor regulation in the town of Pelham, and that council approve in principle the proposed odor management bylaw that corresponds to their preferred approach, being option 2, and that council provide direction to staff on the administrative penalty amounts proposed for contraventions of the proposed bylaw, and that council direct the proposed odor management bylaw, being option 2, be presented to council as amended for consideration at the regular meeting of council. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So next steps then, Mr. CAO? Well, staff will just implement the changes.
For the benefit of the public, staff have now received direction to make some changes to a bylaw that'll get presented, I would think, 2 weeks today. But if anyone wants to correct me on that.
No, that's fine. I would be looking for the direction on the adverse effect versus no adverse effect inclusion. That's the one last piece where I'm looking for direction, which doesn't have to be part of the motion. I can take it as direction, but I just would like to know what to prepare for next day.
Well, back to council.
Really?
Okay. So council, as you heard, our legal is looking for direction. Council.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, from the discussion we've had with regards to adverse effect, as long as the definitions that you've included there advise what adverse effect is, I'm willing to leave those words in. Thank you.
Okay. Everyone else good with that? Okay, excellent. Thank you. To the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be looking for a vote on the motion as amended.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Council Olson. Oh, you're waiting for me to call the question?
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to ask if there's one last chance of anyone debate or question. Yeah, okay. Any, nope, okay, no further debate. All those in favor? Okay, and motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That brings us to our next staff report. I have a motion put forward by Councillor Eckert, seconded by Councillor Olson. Be resolved that council receive report 2024-0209, updated council correspondence policy S201-19 for information, and that council approve the revisions to the council correspondence policy S201-19 as appended. To you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, questions on this agenda item? And